Welcome to Lou Palumbo's Between the Lines. Problem solving for our future. Lou. Common sense, logic, and reasoning. Lou. The man that can't stand hate and animus. Lou. Stimulating the thought process of America. Lou. Where being right is not political, it's factual. Lou. Providing real solutions in real time. And now, here's your host, Lou Palumbo.
Okay, guys, we're here today. This is what we were referring to as Show 2 with Tom Fuentes. If you didn't plug in to the first show, you really need to go back and listen to this show because the information that you heard there was spellbinding. We covered a myriad of topics, including what's going on with the FBI, China, our borders, this political administration. It went on and on and on. I do want to tell you about Tom, since you may not have heard from the first interview. He's currently the president of Fuentes International, L.L.C, a consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. He's a member of the U.S. State Department's Overseas Security Advisory Council and provides executive-level consulting to law enforcement agencies throughout the world. He's been on National Geographic, the History Channel, Netflix. He's been everywhere, but most importantly, he's going to provide you some additional information as a follow-up to our first interview because there's so much to talk about. Tom served as an assistant director of the FBI for 29 years. During his career was 11 years as a member of the U.S. Government Senior Executive Service. He directed the Office of Internal Operations. He also served as a member of INTERPOL's Executive Committee. He was the FBI's executive on-scene commander in Iraq. He's a member of, or was a commander of the FBI SWAT team in Chicago, San Francisco, Indianapolis, and tactical co-commander in the Summer Olympics in Atlanta in 1996. He was also a police officer for 6 years before he went into the FBI. Tom graduated the FBI's Academy in 2007. He has a background, ladies and gentlemen, that I strongly suggest you take some time and look into it. This gentleman is the consummate American law enforcement official. I don't know if there's anyone in his lane as brilliant as this man is. We're going to ask Tom to join us in a moment, and we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Instacart, another interesting concept. You can go to your favorite grocery stores, sign on to their application, without leaving your home, the comfort of your home, just pick out the items you'd like. They'll assign a personal shopper for you and deliver them to the point that you would like them delivered to. Another great concept, very user-friendly, and I'll be honest, we use it also. It's very effective, and they're very, very good. They're very on point. As promised, we are now in the second segment, or the second episode of this show, with the former FBI director of the FBI, Tom Fuentes, 29-year veteran, an incredible, I would just say, career path. I mean, there's so much that he did in the FBI. It's tough to keep track of it. And if we have time, we'll have Tom really get into an in-depth discussion about all of the mission statements he undertook protecting this country. This is the man we need today, by the way, running the FBI. He's the embodiment of honor, integrity, trustworthiness. He's the goods. So we're going to start the show, and I'm going to get right into this discussion about the Hunter Biden laptop, which is where we left off last week. And I want to talk to Tom about the significance, not so much of his personal life, but what's going on with the contents of this computer that's potentially liable or libelous to our country. Tom, please go, sir. And thank you for joining us again.
I think the issue of the computer, of Hunter's laptop, basically is, like you said, we're not focusing on the drug activity and sex activity and things like that. But what we are focusing on is whether they engaged in a pay-to-play operation. And in this case, you have Hunter receiving money from companies in China. And a good friend of mine, Peter Schweitzer, has been documented with the wire transfers, $31 million being transferred from China, from companies related to the Communist Party, the CCP of China, going to Hunter Biden, and then being dispersed among a handful of partners and the, quote, big guy. You had one of the partners, Tony Bobulinski, who has given information. He was on Tucker Carlson twice saying the big guy was Joe Biden, and that they shared office space with a guy from China, including a key for Joe Biden and the other partners. So you have this money coming in, and then you have Joe Biden doing much of the bidding on behalf of China. Then you have, separate from the laptop lately, we have the issue of the Biden Intel Center or think tank center at the University of Pennsylvania. Now, what's significant there is that the Chinese paid the university about, I think, various estimates, but let's say $50 million ballpark to house that. And then in turn, the university gave $1 million to Joe Biden to allow that to be part of it. And this is where you find, some of the documents that were, in the custody of the University of Pennsylvania Biden Center. Well, the interesting thing here is that the FBI had a very strenuous program for many years, going back to the time I was in, investigating Chinese espionage, theft from our, high-tech companies, from our military contractors, from others. It was big, big business. And that China initiative was also focused on the number of professors affiliated with U.S. universities that were also spying on behalf of China. Well, that was going very well until after the president of the University of Pennsylvania writes a letter to the Department of Justice saying, call off this Chinese investigation. We don't need that. And they do. So the FBI program a couple of months ago was terminated that was investigating Chinese espionage at that level in the United States. Now, since then, the university president is now ambassador to Germany, I believe. But you have a clear-cut effort by China to stifle FBI investigations and do so, be able to do it. And who are the beneficiaries of the money that came in? Well, the University of Pennsylvania gets $50 million at least from China, and Biden himself gets $1 million for doing nothing. Now, meantime, then you have the issue, and this probably wouldn't have come to light except for some of the classified documents that were discovered in the last couple of weeks were documents that were part of the University of Pennsylvania Biden think tank center. And then now we have more documents in the meantime that have come out from his garage next to his highly secure Corvette in the garage. And then now from a room next to the garage and all of that. So here you have documents that are in Biden's possession at Biden's residence. And yet there's no searches. There's no FBI team sent in. Where are the rest of the documents? We're going to go through every closet, under every bed, through your wife's closet to look for these documents that we're not aware of, for other documents that likely are in the premises. Now, at Mar-a-Lago, there was no mystery. The FBI knew all the documents that were there. The Records Administration knew, the archive knew they were there, and they were negotiating. And the only comment the FBI made 2 months before the raid, when they were actually in Mar-a-Lago, was, Mr. President, put a lock on that closet. And he did. They had to cut that lock off when they executed their search warrant. So you have a complete double standard of what happened under Trump with documents he was legally entitled to possess, and the Biden administration, where Biden was vice president when those Now, the only thing that could save Biden would be if Obama came out and said, back in before we left the White House, I declassified those documents and said, here you are, Joe, take them. That would be the only. We haven't heard boo out of Obama yet on that issue. So theoretically, Obama could have declassified them, not Biden.
Interesting. The real backstory to this whole thing, Tom, is this thing about accountability that you and I spoke about the other day. My concern is that nothing's going to be done to address this. If you and I drop gum on the sidewalk, they'd be giving us a summons and dragging us into a court before a judge and levying a fine. These are people that are potentially compromising the security of this nation and the future of our children. And there doesn't seem to be any line in the sand that they cannot cross. And I go back right now again, as I said in the prior show, looking to see what the Republican Congress does. And I don't want it to be done as in the form of vengeful politics that bears no fruit. We should just do this because there has to be one standard universally applied. I want to see what the Republicans, this James Comer, who I know you're familiar with, You know, he's doing a whole lot of talking here. Jim Jordan as well. I don't want them to do this because they've got an axe to grind with the Democrats. I want them to do that because they're sincerely invested in the future of our children in this country. I do want to mention something to you about this whole discussion with China that you may be aware of. The governor in the state of Florida just came out and said that there's not going to be any China activity in Florida. You know, you are probably aware they're looking to purchase farmlands or whatever it is in various parts of the country. I'm struggling to understand why they don't know where this line in the sand is regarding China's activity in this country. If people think, and this is something really critically important, if people think the Chinese government is our friend, they are grossly mistaken. They are our adversary. With that being said, I suspect the Chinese people, like the American people, like the Iranian people, like the Russian people, they're just trying to get through the day, Tom. They're not really attached to this political agenda, which really is kind of, I would say, germane to all governments at some point. Like the public is in these countries are just trying to get through the day, and these lunatics are running us into the ground globally, not just here. But I'm just trying to understand, what is it going to take? You know, Tom, the reason we're doing this show is we want to educate the public. That's why you and I talked about a different platform and a discussion I had with Brian Williams, who's one of the owners of the company, that is promoting this thing. We need to change the discussion in this country. We need to educate the public. I tell them, Tom, I don't want to spoon feed you. I want to give you food for thought. You can get off your backside at times and go out and find a lot of this information. Unfortunately, you know, a lot of people are not privy to your journey the same way people are not privy to mine. I have my own insight, my instincts and intuitions about how we're living today and how we got here. I want to get into a discussion with you because I constantly remind people about the population growth, starting from when you and I were born, that it was 150 million. We're at 335 million being reported. My assessment is probably closer to 360, which is twice the population when John Kennedy was born. Now, I think that you held a little fondness for the president as well because, you know, I went to 16 years of Catholic school. I tell people I was spoon-fed by the Irish Catholic nuns I have. No problem. My mother was Scotch-Irish, ironically. I just believed he was the consummate leader. I don't care about his personal life. I don't care about that. I watched this man grow into this job. I watched him galvanize and speak to not only our nation, but he spoke to the world, which is why everyone was enamored with him. Here's the problem we have, Tom. Since he was the president, we've doubled this population. And I tell people all the time, as things grow, the problems associated with managing things that grow exponentially grow. You know, we haven't even talked about the mental illness issue, the mass shootings in this country. We need to get into all these discussions today or another day, Tom, because I know you have a lot of background information I don't have and the American public truly needs to know. But I want to talk to you about Kennedy right now, your impressions of him, your own, not mine, and what took place during his administration. And again, this will be your opinions about what led to his demise.
Well, the problem is that President Kennedy made a lot of powerful enemies. And that's part of being president, part of even being a good president. So when the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba happens early in his presidency, and the actual planning for that and stuff started under Eisenhower. But when that debacle happened, Kennedy wanted that to be a secret. They did not want the rest of the world to think the United States is invading Cuba. This was supposed to be Cuban refugees that had come to the U.S., being trained in South Florida, and then transported back to Cuba to invade and overthrow Castro. So then what happens is the invasion is compromised. It's a debacle. They're getting slaughtered on the beaches. They're getting captured on the beaches. And the military, Curtis LeMay, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is asking Kennedy for air support. Send our jets in there, support these soldiers. And he refuses. He said in the beginning, before the invasion, we're not going to expose ourselves of being involved. So if it doesn't go well, we're not going to identify that it's our process. So when that happens, he makes a bitter enemy of Curtis LeMay in the Pentagon at that time. Then you have the CIA doing various things around the world, assassinating certain leaders, stuff like that, where Kennedy basically gets fed up and fires Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, and a couple assistants of his from the CIA. And he also makes public statements that the CIA has gone too far and he's going to blow them into 1,000 bits. Now, he's not the first president. The President Truman, who was president when the CIA was born, later said, I regret what I've done giving them clandestine authority. They were supposed to be an intelligence gathering, listen to all the radio and TV stations and read all the newspapers of the world and develop sources and tell the president and Congress what's going on around the world. They were not supposed to be actively trying to overthrow governments and assassinate leaders in any country, much less ours. But each president was weak in being able to take them on. And Kennedy, he makes the public announcement that he's going to take the CIA apart. He's already fired Dulles. He's going to take the agency apart. Then, at the time, we have 15,000 military advisors in South Vietnam. Now, a lot of people don't know, Kennedy had visited Vietnam as a senator. He met with French leaders there who told him, stay out of here. You're not going to be able to win this. This is a nightmare. They told him everything. They predicted everything that would happen to us if we went in, which did happen to us. So Kennedy, in October of 1963, a month before he's assassinated, signs an order basically saying, right after New Year's, start withdrawing our advisors. We're not sending troops. We're going to withdraw our advisors out of Vietnam. We're getting out of Vietnam. Now, the military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower warned us about in his last speech before leaving the presidency, basically kicks in. They're looking at Vietnam as a cash cow. They're going to make billions if we fight if we send over. And then ultimately, that's what happens. So after Kennedy's assassinated, he didn't want to stay in Vietnam. He wanted to destroy the CIA. So you had some very powerful enemies right there. Then he commits a second offense, which I'm very knowledgeable of, having run the FBI's organized crime program 5 years. There's a unwritten law in the mafia that you don't mess with the boss's wife, but you also don't mess with his girlfriend. So Sinatra had introduced Kennedy to a woman out of at the Nevada hotel that he owned. He introduces her
Judith Exner, right?
Judith Campbell, and then her married name Judith Campbell Exner. So she not only meets Kennedy, but they begin an affair where she's sleeping with Kennedy in the White House in the afternoon, flying to Chicago to be with Giancana for dinner and be with him overnight. Giancana becomes aware of this. Now, that was one of the double crosses. Joseph P. Kennedy had gone to the mafia, including Giancana in Chicago especially, saying, help throw the election of 1960 so that my son becomes president, and then you'll have peace. We'll protect you. He won't go after you. Well, Kennedy does the opposite. He goes after him with Robert F. Kennedy becoming Attorney General, who has a visceral hatred of the mafia. So he goes after the mob tooth and nail. And at the same time, Kennedy's having an affair with the boss's girlfriend. So double, death sentences for that. So now you have, who did the assassination? CIA, military, the mafia, all of the above. Who
Tom,
knows?
Can we take a quick break, sir? And we're going to come back and finish. I want to continue this conversation about President Kennedy's administration and the convoluted relationship between government and organized crime and what may have precipitated the assassination of President Kennedy, who was really, it was traumatizing when they killed this man. We're going to be right back with former assistant director of the FBI, Tom Fuentes. Just stick with us, guys. We'll be right back. So let me tell you a little bit about Buzzsprout. Very interesting concept. Basically, it allows you to set up your own podcast. One of the most advantageous things about using Buzzsprout is it's user-friendly. So I encourage you highly, if your inclination is to create your own podcast, please look into Buzzsprout. And by the way, we use it. We're back, ladies and gentlemen. We have Tom Fuentes, former assistant director of the FBI, an abundance of knowledge and insight and experience. And we're talking about the Kennedy assassination. And we've turned the clock back a little bit, to be honest with you, to talk about President Kennedy, because I have very fond feelings about him. I was a young boy. Tom was as well. And we're discussing what might have been the impetus to losing him. And we were just talking priorly that, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, sir, but our intelligence community, our government, had a relationship with organized crime to stage the assassination of Kennedy, which is what really created that relationship there. Is that correct to say?
Well, the relationship was earlier. The relationship, the CIA had contracted with Giancana, in particular, boss of the Chicago Mafia, to assassinate Castro. So Giancana, there were probably 100 attempts on Castro's life. They tried sending people down there to give him exploding cigars, LSD in his tea, have girlfriends with poison on their lipstick to kiss him and kill him. I mean, they had a number of attempts, all of which failed. Now, at the time, unbeknownst to most people, was that when Castro took over in basically 1960, 1959, Havana was like Las Vegas became later, full of casinos and American tourists. And so if you had money and you were on the East Coast of the United States, you could fly to Havana in an hour or two and be gambling and living the high life. It was close and it was convenient. When Castro takes over, he wants the help of the mob to get power. And in fact, Jack Ruby was one of the gun runners bringing guns to Castro to help him become the head of Cuba. Once Castro becomes the dictator of Cuba and he ousts his predecessor, Batista, once he's in power, he reneges and double crosses the mafia. So he said, that's it. You're not coming in. You don't get casinos down here. We're going to keep you out. Meantime, the boss of Chicago was Giancana. New Orleans boss was Marcello. And the boss in Tampa, Florida was Santo Trafficante. Trafficante is trying to double cross his partners by compromising Giancana's efforts to send assassins into Cuba and warning Castro so that they're able to block every attempt to kill him. Trafficante, basically, it's believed, was promised that you help me stay alive and eliminate all these threats, I'll give you the sole authority to have casinos in Havana. And of course, Trafficante is seeing dollar signs like most mafia bosses would see. So he helps Castro immensely, and then Castro double crosses him, and they don't get the casinos down there. So you had a couple of year period of the mafia and the CIA having a partnership regarding Castro. So now you have Kennedy double crosses the mafia by having John Kennedy appoint his younger brother, Bobby Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, to be Attorney General. Well, Kennedy had been a Senate advisor to the Rackets Committee in the 50s. He had a visceral hatred of the mafia. So Kennedy becomes Attorney General. He creates the Office of the Strike Force Attorney. So within major U.S. attorneys' offices, it's a separate group to go after organized crime that don't answer to the U.S. attorney or the local management in that city or state. They're hired and trained directly out of Washington. So these strike forces then wreak havoc on the mafia, going after them. So now you've got Kennedy messing around with Giancana's girlfriend. You've got now Kennedy appointing Bobby Kennedy to go after them, which he's going after them tooth and nail. And so therefore, Kennedy is reneging on his promise to help the mafia for throwing the election of 1960 and then doing, with his girlfriend. So the election of 1960, when the election officials turned on the machines at 6 a.m., they already had thousands of votes cast for Kennedy. So the expression, and many of the names were, from the graveyard and people like that. So the expression that even my 10 years as an agent in Chicago, the expression for Chicago was vote early, vote often. That's where we're
losing. We're losing you a little bit, Tom. Tom, we're losing you a little bit. You just froze on us. Tom, you got me?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're talking about, that Kennedy basically has very, very serious, capable enemies who are capable of what we saw in terms of the assassination. They have the opportunity, the means, the assassins, the motive, they have all of that going for them.
Tom, give me some insight or your insight into the Warren Commission. A little bit of background on legitimacy and what drove that and how it was driven.
The Warren Commission was not devised to get to the truth or to find out what really happened. The Warren Commission, when Johnson, and there's recorded phone conversations between President Johnson and Earl Warren, who he wants to take over. Warren doesn't want any part of this commission. Johnson talks him into it that basically we have to have Oswald be the lone assassin. We have to have this commission to show it, to prove it, to tell the public, so they don't think, number one, that there was a coup within our government, or number two, that the Russians or some other outside government actually pulled this off within our borders. So basically Johnson is appealing to Earl Warren's patriotism. You've got to do this to protect the country. He uses numbers like, if you don't, we could have nuclear war and 50 million Americans could be killed. And he just makes this grim picture for Earl Warren that it's his responsibility to save the country. He's got to take over this commission, and the commission has got to find Oswald being the lone assassin. So
the commission itself was really a ruse, wasn't it, Tom? I mean, at the end of
absolutely.
the day,
It was designed to be. It was designed to affirm Oswald as the one and only lone assassin. Now, there's some things that kind of, point to a glitch in that, and that is that, and I personally believe that some of the documents that have yet to be disclosed publicly about the assassination, I think some of those are going to pertain to Oswald working for the CIA. Now, he had been a technician at a U.S. air base in Japan, which is where the U-2 spy plane flights were taking off from and operated out of to fly over the Soviet Union. Now, in those days, in the late 50s, our military believed that the Russians had no capability of shooting a missile at a high enough altitude to bring down a U-2 plane. Now, later, of course, that's proven false when Gary Francis Powers is shot down, captured, put on trial in Moscow. This is during Eisenhower's time. So there goes the theory that they couldn't shoot one of our planes down. Later they shot down a plane in Cuba doing spy flyovers. But at that time, so the CIA has a program where they get some of these young military officers, in this case, Oswald, I think 20 or 21, something like that, and others, to pretend to defect to the Soviet Union. So they turn in their passport, they show up at a U.S. embassy or show up in Moscow and tell the U.S. embassy, here's my passport, I'm pledging allegiance to the Soviet Union, I'm denouncing my U.S. citizenship, I want to be placed here. So Oswald, he gets assigned by the Soviets to go to Minsk, which is now the capital of Belarus, next to Russia, but at the time it's one of the provinces of the USSR. He gets sent to Minsk. Unbeknownst to Oswald, he meets a girl, just happens to be the daughter of the head of the KGB in Minsk, Marina, later his wife. So now the Russians are spying on Oswald. Oswald is trying to spy on them. They assign him to work in a factory. He gains no intelligence. So after about a year or two in Russia, he has found nothing of value for us, for the U.S. So he decides, enough of this, I'm going back to the U.S. So he goes back, says, never mind my renouncing my citizenship. I love the U.S. Give me back my passport. And in a matter of months, he gets his passport back and he's reinstated as a U.S. citizen. Everything's fine. No harm, no foul, his going to Russia.
Let me ask you this, Tom, if I may. It's reported, I mean, you could see it. It was being covered by the news that at one point he came out and said, I'm just a patsy. Did they throw him under the bus, Tom? Did the CIA do that, do you think?
I think
what
so.
happened with this thing with Oswald?
I think they were setting him up to believe that he was going to be the assassin and do what he was told. And, and then they do throw him under the bus. He's going to take the fall for this and be the one and only. Of course, the important key to this is they have to kill Oswald. They can't let him live and possibly say that he had worked for the CIA or he had met with the FBI agent Hosty in Dallas. Any of those things have to be suppressed. So So Jack Ruby gets the contract. Now, Ruby, at the time, they're talking about he's running these nightclubs with strippers and prostitution and all that. And he's compromised many Dallas police officers by entertaining them, hosting them at these clubs. It doesn't come out publicly that Ruby's real name is Jacob Rubenstein. He's a Jewish junior mobster from Chicago that got dispatched to Dallas and set up operations.
You know, what's so interesting about this conversation, Tom, is that especially for our generation, you know, this has really haunted us with the president, especially because of how much potential he represented. But it also highlights, you know, the government's been somewhat convoluted for quite a long time here, you know, and right now my concern is at some point the bow's going to break. And before this concludes, you know, my thing is about fixing things, Tom. So we'll have a discussion about how we get this train back on the track. I want to go to a quick break, ladies and gentlemen. Then I'm going to come back to the former FBI Director, Tom Fuentes, 29-year career. And as you've been listening to, he's got a wealth of information and experience, and he's really been on the cutting edge of keeping this country safe. I'm going to talk to him about Dr. Fauci. We'll be right back, guys. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. We have Tom Fuentes, as I promised you. This is the second show. I encourage you to go back to the first show because there's just a wealth of information from Tom there. We're covering a myriad of topics, which is almost never ending. We spoke about Dr. Fauci. Give us some impressions about Dr. Fauci and some of his antics. I think that's the appropriate term, Tom.
I think Fauci, from the very beginning, when he started doing the press conferences, the beginning of the pandemic, you know, he's twisting stories into pretzels. You know, first, oh, you don't need a mask, they do no good. Then you need a mask. Then you need 2 masks. So all of that kind of stuff that Fauci was doing, it doesn't come out right away, but it later comes out from, even though they tried to suppress every email and Twitter and everything from all of his associates that showed that the U.S. NIH was funding gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab in China, which means that they're aware that there's this bat virus that they're working on there. And the idea of gain-of-function is make it more deadly. Do research or genetic changes or whatever manipulations they can, make that virus deadly. But we're not supposed to, it's against law for us to be funding that lab. Now, Fauci later says, well, first he denies it and lies about that. But then later he says, well, we needed to be able to study that virus. So that's why it was in our benefit to have that research going on down there. But not really true. And of course, the other thing that still to this day remains hidden is Fauci's the highest paid government employee in the United States, somewhere, $400,000 a year or something. And meantime, he and his staff, all these doctors that are on his side, are making money on the side from big pharma. The drug companies are paying them separately. So they're making even more money, and how much we don't know for sure. And when Senator Rand Paul has Fauci on the stand at many congressional hearings, he goes to that point. How much money did you and your people make on the side regarding backing up these vaccines and backing up Pfizer or Moderna or whoever? And Fauci wouldn't answer the question. And if anything, when he answered, he lied. And he'd get agitated with, Senator Paul, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. Well, the old, thou dost protest too much. Fauci refuses to answer the questions. We've not seen any of his financial records from being in the government. Now, I could tell you, having been an executive my last 11 years in the Bureau, you fill out detailed financial reports every year that get filed regarding ethics. But who are you making money from? Now, in the FBI, you can't have outside employment. You can't have another source of income like that. But you could invest in the stock market and get dividends. You have to disclose that. What stocks do you own? What dividends? All of this type of information is published every year to go back to you, to show whether you're being honest and uncompromised, basically. Well, Fauci, we haven't seen those reports. What was he making on the side? And now that he's on a pension, he's on the highest pension of anybody in the government. So the second highest is probably his wife. She was making a couple $100,000 at NIH. Now, what's going to come of this? I don't know, because Fauci is so beloved. Everybody loves Fauci. He's the golden boy of the government. And now the stuff that's coming out, the Twitter releases coming out from Elon Musk, some of the other doctors that are now coming forward that were banned from speaking about it for fear of losing their medical license. Now more and more of this truth is coming out. Now, this is an opinion. What Fauci did, in my opinion, was violate several laws and on a regular basis. In the FBI, in our organized crime program, we call that a pattern of racketeering. And that pattern is something that should be investigated using the RICO statute. And if necessary, you can have his pension confiscated, all of this money taken back. The government can seize that if he's found guilty under RICO, that he had no business making money on the side, and that the money that he was making from the U.S. government could be taken, could be seized. His assets could be seized. His liberty could be compromised. All of this, he's vulnerable to if we have an actual factual investigation of what he did all during this time, going back to the beginning of the pandemic.
And I go back, I revert back to the Congress. The House of Representatives, and what they're going to do in pursuing these issues. It just seems like we completely step away from this concept about keeping it simple, stupid. Everything just becomes so layered and convoluted, Tom, and it starts to work against us. I want to talk to you about January 6th also, because I know you have a lot of strong feelings about this particular topic. My concern, to be very candid with you, is can we get the train back on the tracks here with this country? Is there a mechanism? Is there a will? Is this Republican House going to pursue these issues with Biden's activity at the border, the management of classified information, what went on with his son and his convoluted relationship with three different countries at least? We haven't even spoken about the foreign policy and this egregious withdrawal from Afghanistan, leaving $85 billion of weaponry, abandoning Bagram, and leaving all these poor women and young girls, in the lurch to fall back into the hands of the Taliban. But I do want to get into this discussion with you about January 6th, because I know it's quite a sensitive one. Give us the insight on what's gone on here with this thing that just doesn't seem to go away. For 2 years now, all we can do is jump on this topic. I don't know if anything that they have ridden the horse this hard on. And if you do, let me know. But I know of nothing. They just can't seem to let it go, because it seems to be the only card in the deck that they're hoping is going to play out against Trump. I jokingly say the only people more afraid of Donald Trump than the Democrats are the Republicans, because if you're a knucklehead Republican, he's going to call you out. I just wish we had given him a different skill set. But get into January 6th with me, Tom, if you don't mind.
Well, I wish with January 6th that Trump had actually testified before the commission. It would have been massive, TV coverage all over the country, all over the world. And during that testimony, he'd be able to say, look, we had intelligence that there were some people that were on their way to Washington that might get out of hand, not the million of peaceful protesters exercising their rights, but there'd be a few bad actors in there, which there always are at a major demonstration. And we supplied that information to Pelosi and to the mayor of Washington, D.C. We offered 10 or 20,000 members of the National Guard to help secure the Capitol so nothing bad would happen to the Capitol. Pelosi refused. Why? She didn't have to testify. Why? So I think Trump could have undone her reputation and all of this by testifying and say, I offered the troops. I did not encourage the riot or people go into the Capitol or anything. We encouraged people to exercise their constitutional rights and peacefully protest, period. So I think he should have got that. I think he should have testified and got that out, period. Now, we now know 14,000 hours of videotape has been suppressed. Still, it was suppressed by Nancy Pelosi. That has to come out. That has to show all angles of the Capitol. What were the cops doing? Were they opening the doors and waving these people in? We have all these security cameras within the Capitol. What do they show? What do they show as far as when the protesters got in? It looked like they were just milling around and showing off. Major case of trespassing, trying to overthrow the U.S. government.
Tom, let me stop you for a second. Why would it really be a major case of trespassing? Because these buildings are supposed to belong to the public, both the White House and the Capitol. They're supposed to be there, accessible to us. Now, you and I both know times have changed. You know, the government seems to be able to wrap their arms around with the changing of the times. They had to build a fence around, just happens to be a fence around the White House. And access to the White House now is almost impossible. And the same thing with the Capitol. But we're having a problem correlating that to our borders, which I don't want to go back into this conversation, but you know where I'm going with this thing. You know,
all the major federal buildings are like that. You can't just waltz into FBI headquarters on Pennsylvania Avenue,
but the FBI,
or DOJ,
Tom, but the FBI
or the Pentagon, or the White House.
Tom, the FBI is understandable, though. You know, the FBI, when it was constructed, that whole institution, you know, there needs to be some, I would say, sanctity or integrity maintained to the building. The premise of the White House and the premise of the Capitol, these are buildings that, you know, you're supposed to be able to go in and take a walk around. I mean, just to talk about what you're saying about the people that went in, they have on video, I've seen it, people that had their cameras up just taking interiors of the place. They were just mesmerized by it.
Right.
I've been in the place a couple of times. I know you have. This is not something that's really difficult to understand. You know, what we're really coming away with, Tom, is that, you know, we've taken the honor and the integrity out of this government, and everything has a political attachment to it. I want to ask you about the people that have been detained as a result of January 6th, that the government, I can't figure out if they're prosecuting them, they're not prosecuting them. I know that they've been detained. It almost appears as if it's indefinite. Give us some insight, Tom.
Well, I think that, you know, when you have the FBI currently saying we have 1,000 additional subjects we're looking at in connection with it. They've already, you know, arrested 950 or something. So now you're talking close to 2,000 people. But you've had people that were out protesting on the grounds, never went in the building, that were picked up by the FBI and threatened to be prosecuted or locked up in the D.C. jail and all of that.
Explain explain a little bit more on that, Tom, about what was driving that, because there were a lot of people there that were intercepted, so to speak, or they determined they were there through pinging phones, correct, Tom?
Exactly. The same thing. Interestingly, they used the geocaching of the telephones, which they said with regard to the Dinesh D'Souza movie, 20,000 Mules, or 2,000 Mules, I should say, that they're not capable of doing that. They're not capable of tracking those phones, going to the stash houses of the ballots and repeatedly visiting drop boxes over and over and over. Oh, no, that technology doesn't work. Yet they were able to arrest 1,000 people on January 6th, mainly using that technology. So, you know, and some facial other stuff because they have them on video. But the fact that Pelosi would not allow the videos, the majority hours of those videos to be released, or for her to testify, or the documents that were submitted to her requesting that all she had to do is say, okay, Mr. President, thank you, send the troops, so you could make an argument that in a way, she may have wanted the demonstration to take enough force to disrupt the ballot count, certifying the Electoral College. And that by doing that, it disrupted the meeting or the Senate for hours. And then by the time they resumed, you just had the desire, let's just vote yes, and get this over with. So in a way, was it really Trump supporters that really wanted this disruption? Were it Trump's enemies that wanted this, knowing that the vote would be disrupted, but it would resume and all the electors would be certified? That'd be the end of the story.
Tom, let me ask you this. It's been inferred that the FBI had commingled within these protesters, these demonstrators, these insurgents, agents. You think there's anything to that, Tom? What's your opinion?
Absolutely.
But we do that anyway. I mean, we invade biker gangs. We do it with drug cartels. Yeah. I mean, that's a common practice. But what they're trying to do is insinuate as if the FBI was facilitating this. They don't understand. You know, this is how we gather intelligence, by infiltrating organizations that are potentially adversarial. Tom, unfortunately, we're going to bring this to a close today. we're going to have another discussion independent of this with Brian Williams, who's really the architect of this show, and I spoke to you why. Ladies and gentlemen, I told you this would be a Lulu, and I wasn't kidding, and unfortunately, we have to end today, but there's many more topics to talk about. I mean, I'd really like to have a discussion with Tom on air about technology and his experiences in the counterterrorism world that he lived in for quite a number of years protecting this country. If you haven't come away with who this man is, you need to pick up the phone and give me a call so I can have a little one-on-one with you. But interestingly enough, he should be running the FBI today. You know, Tom, the next time we speak, hopefully on air, the conversations are going to circle around how do we get this genie back in the bottle, because at some point in time, this bow's going to break, Tom. This country's going to fracture. You know, they're pitting us against each other. You and I know that this media is just this animal that goes untethered. They seem to operate with impunity. They say what they want when they want, whether there's truth attached to it or not. It's the agenda. And the thing I want to say to you guys also in closing today, this is not about us being a Republican or being a Democrat or bolstering anybody's platform. You know, we have checks and balances. We're looking at checks and balances right now a little bit, but we're really speaking to you as Americans and as people that are concerned, to individuals that are concerned about our young people here. Tom, I can't thank you enough. We're going to have further conversation probably later today about, you know, where we go from here. I do want to bring you back on sooner rather than later to continue these conversations, because these are educational. You know, I don't know what people are learning today, living day by day in America, but you really need to understand what this country's about, where we started and where we are, and how critical it is. I think personally that we're at a crossroad, Tom. Would you agree?
Yes.
We're going to leave it right there, guys. We'll see you next week. And Tom, thank you so much again for joining us, buddy.
Thank you, Lou. My pleasure.
It's been my pleasure, my honor. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next week.